Hey there YouTube, it's Ray again, and we will be continuing our video series on White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So let's dive into Chapter 5, the good-bad binary. So this is kind of a topic she's already covered before, but we'll get into that in more detail as we discuss further along in this chapter. So first major quote here: to accomplish this adaptation, racism first needs to be reduced to simple, isolated, and extreme acts of prejudice. So what she's talking about here is how white people reduce racism and try to isolate it to events like people being actually racist instead of the system that she claims that it is. And a lot of her examples aren't exactly modern. So racist equal bad, ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited, old and southern, not racist, progressive, educated, open-minded, well-intentioned, young, and northern. She's saying that white people paint a dichotomy and that this is false. For most whites, however, racism is like murder. The concept exists, but someone has to commit it in order for it to happen. So she's saying that white people believe that racism is an action, which to some degree that's true. I believe it's more of a motivation. It's a heart issue, not what you do that makes something racist or not. The good-bad frame is a false dichotomy. All people hold prejudices, especially across racial lines in society and deeply divided by race. So this is, we're starting to get a hint about what the good-bad dichotomy really is. The simplistic idea that racism is limited to individual intentional acts committed by unkind people is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. So white people believe that certain people are racist but not them. And no matter what, whether this is true or not, she believes that this is a problem. So what she's complaining about here is that white people view being racist as bad and view racist people as bad people. This is what the good-bad binary is. This worldview guarantees that I will not build my skills in thinking critically about racism or use my position to challenge racial inequality. She uses this term a lot, thinking critically. Now, when she says the word critical in this book, it usually is in reference to critical theory. And this is one of those times, I would bet. The good-bad binary is at play virtually every day in my work as a consultant on issues of racial justice. My job is to help individuals and organizations see how racism is manifesting itself in their practices and outcomes. Her job is to find racism. So if there is no racism, she doesn't get paid. That's basically what she's saying here. She is a bounty hunter for racism, and sometimes she needs to make racism up. Yet, when I point out a concrete moment in the room in which someone's racism is manifesting itself, white fragility erupts. So she's a racial bounty hunter, and when she finds racism, or what she thinks is racism, people get defensive and don't like that. Her job is to fish for racism. So then she goes on to tell a story about a teachers' conference where one of the teachers had some sort of disagreement with a black parent, and when telling this story, did an impression of the parent. So apparently imitating or telling a story accurately is a form of racial mockery. And maybe this person's imitation or impression of that parent was mocking. but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was racist. But you'll see that she does not think that impressions are not racist. The other thing is she talks about how white people believe that racism is an event, and then she's pointing to an event that she believes is racist. So she's being very inconsistent with how white people are to view racism. As diplomatically as possible, I said, I understand you gained valuable insight from that interaction, and I thank you for sharing that insight with us. And I am going to ask you to consider not telling that story the same way again. So this is how this Karen responds to people telling a story like that. So now we're getting into the issue of colorblindness. So now we're going to be talking about the colorblind statements that she believes do not absolve you from racism. These claims include, like, I don't see color, I don't care what color you are, race doesn't have meaning to me, statement on meritocracy. I just wanted to point this out. I was picked on because I was white / I grew up poor, so I don't have race privilege. So she's trying to tell people that must have forgotten their white privilege how privileged they are. And it's just nuts. And then she goes on to make she goes on later in the chapter to really trivialize the experiences of these people. And then there's color celebrate. These aren't much better. But I guess she views these as better because we're supposed to, celebrate diversity. These typical white racial claims depend on the underlying framework of meaning. Identifying this framework can help us understand how we can manage to make such claims in the context of extreme segregation and racial inequality. So she's talking about how to upset the racial status quo here. When white people say that they work in a diverse environment or that they have people of color in their family, they are giving me their evidence that they are not racist. Okay, I think this is valid evidence. I don't think it's conclusive, but if this is their evidence, how are they defining racism? In other words, what underlying system of meaning led them to make that claim? So here she's disagreeing once more with the traditional definition of racism, which, let me show you once more. But again, she doesn't go by the actual dictionary definition. She has her own definition. Those who claim to have been taught to treat everyone the same are simply telling me that they don't understand socialization. It's not possible to teach someone to treat everyone the same. She conflates the same with identical. And I'll just move on to this quote. Further, we wouldn't want to treat everyone the same because people have different needs and different relationships with us. This is an argument against strict egalitarianism. Now, most white people are not strict egalitarians. They don't believe in treating everyone exactly the same. So she's employing a straw man tactic here. She's not arguing against the actual premises that are being presented against her. When white people say, we just treat everyone the same, they're not saying exactly the same. They're not speaking in a strictly egalitarian way. The feedback I've heard repeatedly from people of color is that when they hear a white person claim to have been taught to treat everyone the same, they are not thinking, all right, I am now talking to a woke white person. Quite the opposite. Some version of eye rolling is taking place as they sign the white person off as unaware and brace themselves for yet another exchange base in white denial and invalidation. I want to take this moment to point out that I do not believe that her sample of black people or other racial minorities is a genuine reflective sample of that population. So these are cherry-picked examples, in my opinion, that the people that talk to her are not your average or representative of the total population. That's one of my major criticisms with this book. So she goes on to say, I would never say because I'm married to a man, I have a gender-free life. We understand that gender is a very deep social construct. Again, I disagree with this. First of all, I'm a complementarian. So I believe that man and woman work well together, and that masculinity and femininity are good together and complement each other. So I don't believe I have a gender-free life because I'm married. And I also vehemently disagree with gender as a social construct. Usually when leftists say that gender is a social construct, they mean that it is a personal construct. For instance, tomboys aren't exactly girls, or are girls and not boys, right? I don't just take someone like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones, pluck her out of that universe, drop her in Saudi Arabia. She does not become a boy there just because she is more into guy things. That's not how gender works. It's not a social construct. The sad fact is many whites have no cross-racial friendships at all. Maybe this is true, but she's not really backing this up. And again, America is a very majority white culture. And a lot of areas in this country are racially homogenous. The white person will still receive white privilege that a friend of color does not, even when the two people are engaged in activities together. So what she's talking about here is friendships. So she's getting into a long rant here about cross-racial friendships. She's saying first that white people don't have it, or not a lot of white people have one. And then she's moving on to saying that even the ones they do, these dynamics still exist. So she's going to make even worse claims here. Racism cannot be absent from your friendship. So even if you were friends with a minority, a racial minority, you are still racist with them. But no cross-racial relationship can be free from the dynamic of racism in this society. I mean, I vehemently disagree with that. This is very easy to disprove because she's making a universal argument. And just logic in general, if you're using absolute language, your argument is often doomed to fail. And that's what she's doing here. Cannot, absolute. No cross-racial relationship. So now she's going to go and talk about these certain claims. A few of them, not all of them. I was taught to treat everyone the same. This is probably the most the dumbest one is I marched in the 60s and her rebuttal against that. So I guess people who fought racism in the 60s are still racist. Maybe this is true. But she's generalizing. But her arguments here are just incredibly dumb. Yet in the 60s, we thought race was biological. We used terms like Oriental and colored. What does she call racial minorities? People of color. Tell me, how is this grammatically different than saying colored people. Now, Oriental is just, it's an archaic term, but I don't think it's racist. But colored, and she calls them people of color this entire book. Robin DiAngelo, come on. So she uses things like language to say that that these people that marched in the 60s are still racially problematic. That's I think that's a new term for us. But what she called racist a chapter ago is now racially problematic. She kind of distances the use of the word racist from certain things. So certain activities or certain interactions are racially problematic, others are racist. So now she talks about people who are white minorities and how they were not really free from racism. While a white person may have been picked on, even mercilessly, by being in the numerical minority in a specific context, the individual was experiencing race prejudice and discrimination, not racism. So this is again saying that people of color cannot be racist. This is supported by her redefinition of the word. It is likely that white students at such a school were treated better by teachers. There is no source to back that claim up. She just throws that out there like we're supposed to accept that. And again, she's trivializing the experience of white people. This is where intersectionality comes into play, where white experiences are inferior to non-white experiences. And then she talks about how white people in this situation, how it's temporary. Upward mobility generally entails moving away from integrated spaces or those in which people of color are in the majority. So this is a second time I believe she's going on about this, how white people want to move away from crappy neighborhoods, and she sees this as a bad thing. My parents were not racist, and they taught me to not be racist. Your parents could not have taught you not to be racist, and your parents could not have been free from racism themselves. Another absolute argument here. Like, if you don't agree with her definition of racism, then she doesn't give you any charity in your experiences or your beliefs. I understand many parents tell their children to not be racist, but the practice of our lives is more powerful than the words we say, and living a segregated life is a powerful message of practice. Again, America is a majority white culture. And just statistically speaking, racial minorities are more concentrated in certain areas. It is very possible to innocently live in a segregated environment, and not even legally segregated, just a natural outcome. This statement simply says, okay, let's read the statement first. My parents were not racially prejudiced, and they taught me to not be racially prejudiced. So this is an expansion to say, this is what she thinks that they really meant. This statement simply indicates that the person is uneducated about socialization process and the inescapable dynamics of human culture. So this is once again her saying, even by your definition of racist, you are still racist. And she doubles down on this later in the chapter. Children today are much more open. In the last chapter, she talked about how she believes that people are actually somewhat more racist in modern times than they were during Jim Crow era. Again, this is erroneous. Even when race is not explicitly disgust, children internalize both implicit and explicit messages about it from their environment. This is true for a lot of things. It's not really a profound statement. Now we got another circle jerk with other sociologists. Race has nothing to do with it. She really doesn't like that one. Okay, this is where she goes completely Marxist. We bring our racial histories with us, and contrary to the ideology of individualism, we represent our groups and those who have come before us. Our identities are not unique or inherent, but constructed or produced through social processes. Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's actually read the rest of the paragraph where she goes full postmodernism. What's more, we don't see through clear or objective eyes. We see through racial lenses. On some level, race is always at play, even in its supposed absence. So there's a lot to unpack here. I don't know if you've ever played Assassin's Creed. In Assassin's Creed, the premise of the game is you go back in time in this machine called the Animus that and you live through the lives of your ancestor because their memory is stored in their DNA. And so that DNA is passed down and genetic memory, basically. She's basically affirming the premise of Assassin's Creed here that, you know, in my DNA I must have some sort of slave holder or slaver even, and that I bring this with me. And I can go back into an animus and relive that with my ancestor. And then she says, our identities are not unique or inherent, so we are not fearfully and wonderfully made. The Bible completely contradicts this. We can look at Jeremiah 1:5. But constructed or produced through social processes. So basically, we are products of our environment, solely products of our environment. So I am a white, normal male, nothing more, and other white, normal males are just like me. We see the world the same. This is not true. So moving on, she says that focusing on race is what divides us. She wants to debunk this statement here. Even though participants of color repeatedly state that whites' refusal to acknowledge racial differences and power dynamics actually maintains racial inequity, white participants continue to insist that not talking about differences is necessary for unity. So white people say, let's focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. And she says that this isn't good enough. And she believes that her sample of racial minorities is representative of how this population feels about the moving past race and not focusing on it. Again, I reject that this is a representative sample of racial minorities. But unequal power relations cannot be challenged if they are not acknowledged. This is true, but she's using a critical theory framework to make this argument. Refusing to engage in authentic exploration of racial realities erases and denies alternative racial experiences. If we block out other realities, see that's postmodernism here. Again, as Christians, we view reality as an objective thing. It is objective. It is not personal. So we're coming up on the end of the chapter here. Racism is so deeply woven into the fabric of our society that I do not see myself escaping from that continuum in my lifetime, but I can continually seek to move further along it. So this is Robin DiAngelo getting personal again. And she kind of says, I'm not sure if we can win this fight, but I think we can advance this fight. But we'll see later on what she thinks a win is, or what she's willing to say a win is, and what she implies a win is. And she's not sure about it. So there's a sense of uncertainty here, which is perhaps some of the most honest writing she's done in this book. Conceptualizing myself on an active continuum changes the question from whether I am or am not racist to a much more constructive question. Am I actively seeking to interrupt racism in this context? And perhaps even more importantly, how do I know? So this is where she talks about her stated goal that I just mentioned. Her stated goal is to interrupt racism. Her implied goal is something else, something far more political, and that is Marxism. But she'll say that in a later chapter. So interrupting racism is her goal, not ending it, just interrupting it. And I want to just summarize what the purpose of this chapter is. The purpose of this chapter is to say that if you're racist, or if you're white, you're racist. But just because you're racist doesn't make you a bad person. So for the first 4 chapters, she's been railing against white people and how they're racist. In this chapter, she's trying to ease it back a little bit. Call them racist, but say, they're there. That doesn't make you a bad person. This sets up the later phase in the book. So we're in this middle section of the book now. So now she's talking about being racist doesn't make you a bad person, but you need to change. So the first section here, the first 4 chapters, you are a racist. You have a problem. The second 4 are more about you need to change. And then the last 4 are more about how do you change. So she believes that being a racist doesn't mean you're a bad person. Now, as a Christian, I just want to use this opportunity to point to the gospel, that we are all sinners. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. And for some people, that means that they are vehemently racist. And for that reason, they have fallen short. But we have all fallen short of the glory of God. We are all in need of a Savior. And Jesus is that Savior. He was crucified and raised on the 3rd day. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. This alternative religion that Robin DiAngelo is evangelizing here does not provide real hope. And you'll see that. Her hope is to interrupt racism. But the hope that Jesus brings is a hope that changes lives. And I just want to end with that note. I'm Ray, and this is the 5th chapter of our rebuttal on White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next installment, and I will catch you on the next one.